So I crossed the finishing line, and about 30% of the people that complete the Ironman will go to the medical tent, whether it's IVs or some sort of treatment. I felt amazing. I stayed there. I helped everyone that was coming across the line. I took them to medical tents. And at the end of the night, at midnight, when they have the cutoff, I jumped on my bike. I put my backpack on. I biked back to the hotel. I felt amazing. That's when it changed for me. It's not everyone that crosses the finishing line is a champion, because that guy didn't cross the finishing line. I saw people having crashes on their bikes, blood, helmets all over the place. They didn't cross the finishing line, but they were still a champion. A champion is someone that's willing to step over the start line, not knowing the journey ahead, but commit to being the best they can be. And that's where it comes back to the entrepreneurial journey, which is what I didn't realize I had lived my whole life. But exactly what you talk about, Paul, someone that can't sit inside the box, that may be scared to step outside because everyone's telling you, you'll fail, you can't do it, you can't create this, this is not who you are. Be regular, be normal, whatever that is. But if you're willing to take that first step over the start line and commit, boy, it can be a glorious journey, and the people you meet along the way will inspire you to continue to be everything you're born to be.
Dan Metcalf, it's a pleasure to meet you again, and a pleasure to welcome you onto the Inner Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here, and it's really good to see you again too.
We spoke about this before we pressed record. We met in Phoenix about a month ago, and you stood up and you briefly spoke about the life you had, which to me is both extraordinary and varied. You were a professional football player. You were the lead in Lloyd Webber's Starlight Express, and then a very serious accident, I suppose, led you to have to rethink your whole life, but has led to you writing the book SuperHuman, and to a completely new a completely new chapter in your life. So it's an extraordinary story, an extraordinary life. So why don't you start at the beginning and tell my audience who Dan Metcalf is?
Well, thanks so much. Yeah, Born Superhuman really is about all of us. We're all born with this incredible ability to exceed societal expectations. And my life kind of highlights that, but not because I'm better than anybody else. It's just I had these things thrown at me. And I'm a huge believer that we don't really have roadblocks. We just have obstacles that come along, and how we handle them really comes from our own character. And we can always develop our character. So a quick little recap. Yeah, I'd gone through wanting to be a footballer. That was my whole life as a kid. And so many of your listeners, viewers will get it. My whole life was that. And I was fortunate enough to get scouted and seen by Crystal Palace as a youth player, and then had trials with Brian Clough, brought me into Nottingham Forest to go up there, and who was a legend. I was captain of my county team back in Dorset, and had a very big upbringing, I should say, in football. But when I was at Bournemouth, I just decided it wasn't for me. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. It wasn't the professional game. So I started doing aerobics, getting supple for mountain climbing. And the teacher there said, you should become a dancer. I'm like, what? A dancer? Here I was, the shaved head. I'm carrying 50-pound backpacks running on the sand. But I thought, well, I'll just do it for a laugh. So I went up and I got offered a full 3-year scholarship to start in 2 weeks' time. And I'm like, am I going to do this? I'd never even thought of dancing. It's not a man's sport. And so I did it just for a laugh, and then found out I could act, sing. I won't tell your viewers to imagine me in ballet tights, but I did do ballet. And kind of like the Billy Elliot story.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate in a year and a half to be in Andrew Lloyd Webber's shows on the West End. Ended up going all over, and I'm going to cut this story really short, but toured Japan with the show, Germany, and opened the show out here in America. And during one of the shows, I had an accident on stage. I fractured my spine. I was paralyzed. They said I'll be disabled for life. And
this is in the middle of a live performance.
Middle of a live.
Thousands of people. Wow.
Yeah, and it was at the Las Vegas Hilton, which is where Elvis Presley used to perform. And I'm like, what am I going to do? Well, I'm just going to cut to the chase. It's not a supportive system. It was cheaper to disable me than it was to help fix me. So I had to take my own journey back into my hands and say, I'm not going to become a statistic. And there's something that I think everyone can relate to. Why be a victim when you can be a hero?
When
Uh,
you say it was cheaper, you mean the medical system? It was cheaper just to leave you disabled, effectively.
yeah, disable him, give him a little bit of, workers' comp every week.
Yeah.
And who was going to employ me? Who would come back in? Or, I was in show business. I wanted to do movies. I came to America to,
Mm,
do all this different stuff. Why would I settle? And as I
mm,
said, why become a victim of a system or a thought process when you can become the hero? And
mm.
it's not the hero for someone else, it's the hero for yourself. So I started coaching football from a chair, very quickly had tremendous success because of my background, and took this group of players that had never won a game to third in the state in 7 weeks. I suddenly become a head coach on the Olympic program over here. Nike Coach of the Year, Under Armour came to me and said, we want you to be the spokesperson. I started,
Stop here. Were you doing this from a wheelchair?
well, to begin with, I was, but I was
Yeah.
working myself back in.
So
And
just you talk about this a kind of a switch in the mindset, this decision, I'm going to be the hero. But how long did it? So you had this horrendous moment. You're on stage. You're seriously injured. Um, how long did it take you to shift? Because I'm sure there was a period of that where you were absolutely horrified, terrified, in trauma, in a lot of pain, wondering what your future held for you. How long did it take you to shift your mindset, and what was the process you used? Because I'm sure it wasn't immediate. You didn't lie there and go, that's no problem, I'm superhuman.
yeah, I didn't even think of it at that time because,
No.
look, growing up as kids, we got injured all the time. You get hurt. It's okay. You don't think about it. But the scariest moment, Paul, for me was the night of the accident. I'm lying in the hospital bed and I lost sight in my right eye. I
No.
couldn't see. And I was so scared to go to sleep that night because I was worried if I wake up in the morning, if I lost sight in my left eye, will I never see again?
Mm.
And what it was, 'cause I hit my head first against a wall at about 30 miles an hour, and during the show. And the optical nerve, there was so much swelling in my brain that it put pressure on the optical nerves that stopped it from being able to receive light and see. But I didn't know that. I didn't know much about health at that time. And so that was the scariest thing. So when I finally fell asleep that night and woke up the next morning, I could see that immediately gave me hope that things could get better.
Mm.
Now, the doctors, again, they just wanted to push me through the system. And it got to the point where I could begin to feel tingling again. I could begin to feel movement again. Um,
Were you paralyzed at this stage?
yeah, like I could move my toes a little bit. It wasn't a paraplegic type
Mm.
of
Yeah.
paralysis. Couldn't move my arms. I could feel some sort of feeling, not in my arms,
Mm.
but in my lower extremities. So then I looked at it, and it sounds weird, but I was more determined than ever in my life to overcome an obstacle. Because, when you're trying out for a
Yeah.
football team, you got to get through those auditions. So we
Mm.
were used to those type of challenges. But this
Mm.
one, again, I'll always be honest. If I had had a gun, I probably would have killed someone because they
Mm.
were doing everything they could to stop me getting better. So I wanted to do this. I go and they said, well, we want to um, take you through a psychological analysis because in America, it's all governed by lawyers. So their lawyers were basically the lawyers in Las Vegas owned the hotels. So I couldn't get a lawyer to represent me. So I had to go to California, find a lawyer that was able to practice in Nevada. And all I wanted to do, I never sued for money.
Mm.
I wanted the right to see my own doctors because all the doctors were shutting me down. And I think that resistance actually made me more determined to come back because now it wasn't just a physical issue, it was a restrictive issue that I'm saying, I want to break free. And I think it was a godsend. I think everything in life is a godsend. I think everything is an opportunity. It just matters how we see the lesson and what we're willing to do. And that transferred back into business, but we'll talk about that later.
Mm. So that was a very hard lesson to be lying almost entirely paralyzed in a hospital bed and see the possibilities. It's about as dark as it can get.
Yeah, God, well, I might tell you a story I've never told anybody, but
Please.
we'll leave that one down a little bit. That was more about business, which
Yeah.
actually was darker than
Okay.
that moment about
Okay.
business. But look, when we've suffered, we come back, we forget the suffering we've had.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
do.
we forget the pain. I remember when my dog passed away, I'm crying. Now I don't cry over losing him, but I still remember the moment, but I don't feel the same pain.
Mm.
So I remember going and sitting, when I got my own lawyer, all my records disappeared. There was suddenly no records of any incident. There was all my x-rays, MRIs, everything disappeared. Then they called me in to see a psychologist. And they said to me, "We think you're lying about your injury." I wasn't suing for money. I said, "How can that be? I've been in hospital. I'm going through physical therapy. I had to learn to take a nut and put a nut on a screw and actually put it together. Then they'd have me pushing a shopping cart when I'm beginning to walk again around, follow the blue line, follow the yellow line, pick up this can, put it in the cart, push it." And I said to the psychologist, "What do you want me to be? Because I'm an actor. You want me to be crazy? I'll be crazy. I'm an actor. That's what you want
Yeah.
me to do."
Yeah.
And it was crazy, Paul. Everything they did to try and numb us and dumb us down, which it was just an exaggeration of sometimes what happens in society, kids in school telling this is what you should be, this is all you can be, which is why the entrepreneurial life is so dynamic because we're stepping outside the box with walls that others built for us.
It's I mean, we spoke about this earlier as well in how you describe an entrepreneur because um, a lot of my audience are entrepreneurs. I'm an entrepreneur, but I think entrepreneurial is something wider than that. To me, it's anyone with that creative spirit that has a vision of how they want to live their life. It could be a mother how she wants to raise her children, or a nurse. It could be anyone who wants to create someone that spark of wanting to create something outside of what society insists you should be. I think that's that entrepreneurial flame.
It's interesting you say that because I used to think that anyone crossing a finish line is a champion,
Mm,
right? You go out, the winner is the first one across the line.
mm,
But to be a champion in life, you just got to cross the finish line. Well, one of my goals after paralysis was I decided I wanted to race a triathlon. I wanted to do an Ironman because that for me would be the ultimate in recovery from the injury to come back. What's the hardest thing I could do to prove and have this great goal? So this is where my perspective changed. I went up to Canada, up to Penticton to race the Ironman Canada. And this was about 10 years later. And I'm standing at the start line, feeling fit. I've spent the money to go up there. I've been training for 7 months, super hard on the bike. I know you love the bike. I
yeah,
love the
yeah.
bike and stuff. And they play the national anthem on top of the cliff by the side of the Lake Okanagan. The cannon goes off and we all go running in the water. And I'm near the front. I'm swimming like crazy. And suddenly some hand came over the back, grabbed and pushed me under the water to propel themselves forward. We're about a minute and a half. And of course, at the beginning, you're at the full amount of your oxygen intake. You're going, it's like sprinting to then get into your rhythm. When I went underneath the water, I couldn't get back up. There's 2,000 people behind me or close to 2,000. And I'm trying to come back up and everyone's swimming and there's the water and the kicking and I couldn't come up. And I realized I was going to drown. And so at some point I hit the peaceful mode. I just went into peace. Okay, it's over. And I just felt myself releasing all the fear. It's over. And once I hit the peace, I then turned and I saw a little gap, maybe two people size of everyone swimming. I went, that's my escape. So I calmly swam towards it because it's moving as everyone's going. I came up, and as soon as I hit the air again, I'm going, I can't do this. It's over. I can't do. And I lay there for about 3 minutes with people pushing by me, just going, it's done. I can't do this. And then I started to think, hang on a minute, you're okay. You've calmed down. You've realized just get back in and just do it. Get back in the game.
Mm.
So I started, I don't know if you know much about swimming, but you can draft the same as you can on a bike. You can draft in the water. You get behind someone's feet and you
And you
swim.
get the drag, yeah.
Yeah. And so I got in there and I started feeling good. And then I started passing these groups and catching other people's feet and then going on to the next one. I had a fantastic swim. I got out there, got on the bike, had an incredible bike ride up over the Rockies, got back down. I'd never run a marathon in my life. The most I'd ever run was 16 miles because I had a drop foot in training. Sorry, a dropped arch in
Mhm.
training. I had a great run, but when I'm about a mile away from the finish line, the guy next to me collapsed and he's completely frozen. And I didn't want to stop because I didn't know what's going to happen to me. But I'm shouting to the crowd, please come over, someone help him, someone help him. And he had just completely cramped up. So I crossed the finishing line, and about 30% of the people that complete the Ironman will go to the medical tent, whether it's IVs or some sort of treatment. I felt amazing. I stayed there. I helped everyone that was coming across the line. I took them to medical tents. And at the end of the night, at midnight, when they have the cutoff, I jumped on my bike. I put my backpack on. I biked back to the hotel. I felt amazing. That's when it changed for me. It's not everyone that crosses the finishing line is a champion because that guy didn't cross the finishing line. I saw people having crashes on their bikes, blood, helmets all over the place. They didn't cross the finishing line, but they were still a champion. A champion is someone that's willing to step over the start line, not knowing the journey ahead, but commit to being the best they can be. And that's where it comes back to the entrepreneurial journey, which is what I didn't realize I had lived my whole life. But exactly what you talk about, Paul, someone that can't sit inside the box, that may be scared to step outside because everyone's telling you you'll fail, you can't do it, you can't create this, this is not who you are. Be regular, be normal, whatever that is. But if you're willing to take that first step over the start line and commit, boy, it can be a glorious journey. And the people you meet along the way will inspire you to continue to be everything you're born to be.
Yeah, what resonates with that is that when you do an Ironman or marathon or anything, entrepreneurial journey, whatever it is, society or other individuals have determined what success is, what winning means. So you do the Ironman, and winning that Ironman is being the first person across the line in the fastest time, whatever, and one person wins. And of course, technically that's true, and if it's the Olympics or something like that. But the reality of it is, everyone that goes out and makes that effort and achieves that as a winner. But if you cross that finish line and you have damaged your health, or you end up on IVs, or you end up in hospital or something, what's the point? I mean, I ran the New York Marathon, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Um, but I damaged my leg doing it, and I ended up having knee surgery a couple of years later. Now, I'm glad I did. I enjoyed doing it. But you have to ask yourself, if you pay a price. I mean, some people pay a price that's not worth paying. You have to define yourself what success is. That's what I'm for the starter. You have to define what success is, and sometimes success is not what comes at the end. It's the race.
It's the lesson. Like, okay, so let's go back. New York Marathon, congratulations.
Thank you.
You did it. You injured your leg. What was the lesson that you learned that you carried forward from that?
Well, there were two lessons actually. One was preparation, because actually wasn't. I mean, I was maybe 45 years of age when I ran it. I hadn't trained sufficiently for it, and I was not physically fit coming up to that. So I wasn't properly, my body wasn't properly prepared to run for 26 miles. It just wasn't. Um, it needed longer preparation. That was the first thing. But around mile 13, I started to hobble. um, but I'd never run a marathon before. I'd flown all the way to New York. My wife and three children were following me around, going from station to station. And this was a major event for me because I'd never been in sport all my life. And the decision was, I'm finishing this. Now, I didn't, I actually can't remember how long it took me. My decision then was, I'm finishing this no matter what. And that to me was a huge achievement, to finish it no matter what. So that maybe was the big lesson. I suppose I did end up a couple of years later having to have knee surgery. Was it caused by that? I don't know, probably. But the thing that changed as a result of that for me was that I had this major achievement. I'd run the New York Marathon. I had never in my life before been fit. Never. I mean, I just never. It just wasn't of interest to me. Um, but I gained so much in that. I kind of thought, you have to use this now. Like, you can't waste this. At the same time, my brother-in-law ran the Dublin Marathon, and the day he finished, he's never exercised since. Just didn't. But I worked so hard to get from no exercise, not moving, to running a marathon, that I said I will maintain that. And even after I injured my knee, I said to myself, okay, I'm not going to run anymore. But now I said, we spoke with this, I cycle. And now fitness, I'm 50, almost 60 years of age, and fitness is a huge part of my life. So, and I think it's a major contributor to everyone's life. We know now it's the magic pill for health and wellness. So had I stopped at mile 13, would I have come to that same conclusion? Because the amount of benefits in my life. But I didn't win the marathon. I didn't come anywhere near that, but I didn't need to.
And again, you were able to wrap the experience into something that served you for the rest of your life, continues to serve you now.
Yeah.
And we always pay a price. Look, I opened businesses that didn't succeed, but I didn't fail, right? There's this type of thing. Okay, I'll tell you this. It's a funny story. I was coaching a U8. I was a head coach on the Olympic program, Nike Coach of the Year, as I said. I got 40 players that I've trained that are playing pro. And I was opened a non-profit organization for kids. And I had this little boys team that were 10 years old. And we went out and we played in the State Cup. We played against a team of Hispanic players, talented, but much bigger than we were. And we lost 5-2. But we were brilliant. Anyone watching the game would have thought we were the better team. They had a big defender, big forward, kick it long, score the goal. But we were brilliant. So afterwards, we're in this big, 14-field stadium or area complex. And our field is near the exit gate. So I bring all the kids in, sit down, they're crying. I get the parents gathered around. All the other teams are walking by. And I say to the kids, all right, everyone, how are you feeling? We lost. Okay, do this. Everyone put the L on your head. And they were like, oh my God. So the kids are doing it because I'm the coach and they're just doing it. The parents are like, what an ass coach. We play for this guy. All the other parents and teams are walking by, winners and losers, all turning around and going, what an ass. I'd never let myself, my kid play for that coach. I said, okay, what happened today? We lost. I said, did you? Yeah. What was the score? 5-2. Who was the better team? We were. I said, you can never lose if you learn. That L on your head is only determined by what you make it.
Yeah.
I said,
Learner versus loser. Yeah.
I said, you were brilliant.
Yeah.
I said, I'm so proud of you here. All the parents gone by aren't hearing this. My parents are now going, oh, I like this coach.
Yeah.
But I'm like, you will never lose if you continue to learn. So when my businesses went under, it's only a lose if I didn't take what I learned forward. I have to learn lessons. There's a saying that I love. Every level has its own devil. Every level has its own devil. And that's why if we play video games, the first level, you can't beat it. And suddenly you beat it, you go to level 2. Now it's a little harder. You get through level 2, then you lose. You go back to level 1 again. You're like, God, this is so boring. It's easy. But if you're not willing to face the devil that's saying, if you want to go to the next level, you've got to learn the lesson. You've got to understand. If you do, and that's why we have the pyramid of success, right? Everyone starts here. But as we go up the different levels, there's these different places where people get stuck and they settle. And there's nothing wrong with that. I see people that are super happy, that are settled, but maybe not living the life that I want. And that's why we're all different. But if you can learn the lesson and understand, the first question I always ask, why? Not why did it happen? Why do I need to experience this to learn to go to the next level? Because if I'm smart enough to learn it, I'm smart enough to overcome it. But if I have the resistance that goes on, it will actually take me down. If I'm not open to learn the lesson or try and find the thing, I've reached my level.
Isn't it like the Buddhists call it the two arrows, and the first arrow is the suffering, the first level of suffering, or sorry, you lose the game or whatever. That happens, shit happens. The second arrow is when you start beating yourself up over it, and you have the choice, because we will all suffer defeat and failure. Every single person will. That, to some degree, you don't have a choice about that, because if you go out and engage in life and entrepreneurial, sport, whatever, you take that risk of rejection, of failure. The question is, how will you define it? Will you be the loser or the learner? It's a subtle, but it's a massive distinction.
Yeah, I've never met a successful entrepreneur that couldn't learn lessons. It's the hard thing is, and God, there's so many things we could talk about, because I have some things that are controversial, but it's right each time. But we're brought up to not want to hear the word no, right? Or not say no. We have this guilt. If someone says, your grandma says, will you take this out, but you're doing something, you don't want to say no because you feel you're told you got to, honor your grandparents or your seniors, which is right. But at the same time, we also don't ask that girl out that we like in case she says no, because we've been told no is a rejection. I rephrase it. No is a capital N, capital O. It either stands for next opportunity or it stands for no obligation. One or the other, right? So if I go in and all I want to do is have success and find the easy way, there's a great saying I heard from, I can't remember who it was the other day, but it said, if your path seems easy, it's because you're walking on someone else's.
Yeah.
And an entrepreneur has to carve their own path. And it's fascinating when you get into who are you really? See, okay, we'll go into this controversial thing here, Paul.
Please.
Right, yeah. And you're going to, okay, so anyone that's listening and yourself as well, you are going to reject me right now. You're going to turn around and say, Dan's full of crap. This isn't true.
Okay, go for it.
But we're going to work through this. In life, we don't have choices. We don't have any choices in life.
Okay.
And people would turn around and go, well, of course, I got up this morning. I can choose to go to the gym. I can choose to go to this different thing. I'm here because of the choice that I made. Well, I look at it and say choices are either an ego boost or an excuse. So if we didn't win that day with that kid's game, it was because they had a big player at the back, big player at the front. And that's why. That's my excuse. Well, the reality was we weren't ready yet to defend against a big player and shut down the long ball or drop off the space or whatever we're doing. So if I said to you, okay, Paul, you're in the height of your life, everything's going great. Here's a line of cocaine. Here's $100 bill. It's pure from Colombia. Go ahead and do it. Are you going to do that?
Not a chance.
Okay. But you had the option, right?
So
how?
I had the choice, didn't I?
Right. That's what we're talking about, right? But if it was truly a choice, why didn't you take the time to think about it? Why did you say not a chance?
Because I've made the decision, maybe because the decision I've made in advance of that I would never, I don't do drugs. And but also as you laid it out, I have a good life. I know how destructive drugs like cocaine, heroin are. Why would I even touch it? So for me, there is no choice there. I agree. Am I not still choosing in that instant?
No, because
No.
like you said, you already set. What you've got is you've got your character. Seeing character will determine our path, not our choices, because our character would determine what we do. So if you said, no, I won't do it, and then you have a bad day and go, okay, I'll do it. And then you do it, and then you go, okay, now I'm not going to do it. It's not that you're changing your choice, it's that your character's constantly wavering. So when you're an entrepreneur and you step out onto a path and said, this is what I want, but you know what? Today I'm going to take it easy. Today I'm not going to, but tomorrow I'll work hard. And then you procrastinate. That's not choices. That's a lack of character determination set that comes in. And I've talked this through with incredible mentors. And everybody at the end of the day comes back and agrees, you know what, you're right. Because, Paul, when you get up and you exercise, it's not because you want to every day, it's because you know what's good for you. And so I will commit to that. That becomes when your mind is saying, don't do it, but you get up and do it anyway. That's not a choice, that's a character. So I say to people, with many that I've mentored, decide who you are, because that would determine the path you take. And when you say this is okay, so we'll make it very easy. If you're going to go out and you're in a marriage or you're with your girlfriend, but it's okay to cheat one time because it was just thing and the alcohol got me there. Well, then if alcohol causes you to cheat, you have to say no to the alcohol if you want a successful relationship. If you can handle your alcohol and still say no, then that's a different, again, determination. But whatever's pulling you down is not a choice. It's a lack of character established. Or as you begin to succeed and grow through life, we can make mistakes that comes through decision making. But when we know what's good and what's not, and we continue to do what's not, it's not a choice, it's a character flaw. You know who Mark Burnett is?
I don't.
Okay, Mark Burnett is the creator of Survivor, Apprentice, Celebrity Apprentice, The Voice. You'll see Mark Burnett Productions. He was a good friend of mine on board of directors for my nonprofit. Great guy. And he told a story. He used to be with the paratroop regiment. He fought in the Falklands War. And he talks about they went out on a sortie, just a training sortie, and they came to a fork in a mountain, not knowing whether to go left or to go right. And they sat there for 2 hours because it wasn't on their GPS. They didn't have all that, the technology we have now. And he said they sat there for 2 hours deciding, do we go right or do we go left? And in the end, they decided to go left. About 300 meters down there, it came to a dead end. And he said what they had was a lack of sensory acuity, of understanding to go off of your gut instinct, make that decision, because it's a form of procrastination from indecision. But if they had gone 2 minutes and found they were on the wrong side, they would have saved themselves an hour and 56 minutes, 2 minutes there, 2 minutes back. If they had taken the right and committed to it, they would have come to their destination they had to. And so you learn, but you've got to go off of your instinct. You've got to trust. And when you make a mistake, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, because you will then continue to develop your knowledge, your wisdom, and your character to move. And again, I'm going back to the entrepreneurial journey here because your listeners, yourself, all experts in taking your life and saying, I want to live my life, not live somebody else's. It's critical that we understand how important who we are is to the process.
Entirely. It's, when you talk about entrepreneurs, and one thing I've noticed, because I'm in a number of entrepreneurs groups, I mix and speak with a lot of entrepreneurs. And the one thing is probably 100% the case is that every successful entrepreneur I know has failed on multiple occasions. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, most of them I know, and maybe that's because of my age, most of them I know are on the road decades. So you now see them as a successful, wealthy individual, whatever, and they have a story that's decades long of their journey. And many of those wrong turns that were dead ends, many failures, and they just kept going. And maybe that is character. And I know many of them would have met very hardship along the way. Now, the question you're raising there, or I'm raising my head now, is at those moments, did they ever have a choice? Was there ever a doubt? And I would say they maybe the answer is they were like those soldiers at the. Sometimes they sat for a couple of hours, you know, licking their wounds, but they were always getting up and moving on. They were always, but sometimes it just takes, sometimes you procrastinate, maybe, but that is the character thing. They're never stopping. And what I kind of don't like is this modern idea of, you'll be a millionaire overnight, blah blah blah. And the problem I have with that is that if people believe that, then they have a frame of mind that says, well, if I'm not a millionaire in 12 months, 6 months, if I don't have my Ferrari or whatever, then I must be a failure and I'm not capable of doing this. Instead of going, well, actually, if you went out and spoke to real entrepreneurs, you'd find, yeah, it took me 20 years. You go, okay, so I'm only beginning. Let's go. It's a,
Yeah, it's the 20-year immediate overnight success,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Because people don't see the hard work that goes on. When, I know so many football fans, they'll look at Cristiano Ronaldo and Messi. Those are always the two, who's the better of those. But I was fortunate enough to, play with George Best, and when he was at Bournemouth just for a short time. And
Now, George
bunch
Best
of
is a legend to Irish people, you know that.
absolute legend. For me, one of the greatest players that ever lived. And he could have had the same discipline that Ronaldo, he wouldn't have been himself. And that was part of the flair, was he was just who he was.
Yeah.
But if he could have stayed around longer, what a
He was
brilliant
destroyed
player.
by alcoholism.
Yeah.
Did he have a choice in that?
Well,
Because
I think it was.
the reason I asked that is I remember seeing we have a very famous TV show here on a Friday night called The Late Late Show, and it's gone for decades. One of the longest running shows in the world. And I remember seeing him on. I mean, he's dead many years, but I remember seeing him on many years ago, and he was now over. He was recovered from alcoholism. He was sitting there with his wife, and he was talking to the presenter about how he was, turning his life around, etc., etc., etc. Unfortunately, it didn't last long, and he went back on the drink, and obviously died. Uh, Died a relatively young man. Where does character come into that? Is there addiction, and is addiction and character, are they? Does one override the other?
Well, you could look at it and say people that do overcome addiction have to have that character to continue to say no.
Mm.
And when you give in to the pressure, and there's no criticism here, there's no judgment.
Yeah,
There's one thing, I don't judge anybody,
yeah,
because we don't walk in their shoes
entirely.
and understand the stress and pressure that goes on. But the ones that are able to overcome and sustain it is because of a character decision that in the worst of times, they can still stay true to that, because every addict still has a craving at times to take the easy road. Now, I'm not saying it's the easy road in life.
Yeah.
I'm saying it's the easy road for the moment. And we'll go into this a little bit deeper, but I specialize in brain remapping. I specialize in how do we create that ability to develop our character through our thought process that becomes our strength in the toughest of times. And I'll tell you how I got there.
Mm.
2018, out on a bike ride, bicycle, going through a guard gated community, my own community. I'd gone through thousands of times. I'm going through it around 22 miles an hour, and a security guard brought the metal gate down on my head. Yeah.
Had your head not had enough trauma in its life?
I've got more I could share with you.
Okay.
But I was knocked unconscious immediately. I still remember seeing that pole at the last second and trying to duck. Then it went black. I've got the video because of security cameras. When I do my keynote speaking, I show the video. It shocks everyone. It sounds great. But I then hit the ground, already unconscious, frozen on the back of the helmet. And professional helmets, right? They're hard to break. This one broke open. That's how hard it was on the cerebellum. I was unconscious for about 3 minutes. Part of my brain died. I had to learn to talk again. I had to learn to function. I had to learn to move properly. And this was, 2018. I don't remember anything for about 40 minutes afterwards. But what's crazy, Paul, is I got back on my bike and I rode home. The security guard came out. You can see him. He's taking notes. I stumble like a drunken fool to the side. I pick up my water bottle, blood on my hands, put it back. I hang there for 15 minutes, get back. I had no idea I got home. The first moment I remember was 40 minutes later when the ambulance was, the fire department was knocking on my garage door. I can say it. I can say garage. My garage door, the front door, the windows. And I suddenly came round again. They came and said, "We've got to take you to hospital." Apparently, the security guard on a different gate knew who I was and called me. Apparently, I answered the phone. I had no idea. And so I had to go back in, and nobody was helping me get better. So I decided, we are born superhuman. We're incredible. Think about when you were born or when your kids were born, the doctor didn't look at the baby and said, okay, we're going to cut the umbilical cord. Are you ready? They just snipped. And for the first time since conception, you were thrown on your own. Now you have a team around you that would help support, but ultimately you're in charge of you taking on that first time of no support from the mother to then having to learn to breathe on your own, to survive, to consume food. Your body is incredible. And what people don't know is when they're babies, most people don't know, I should say, the baby's brain is completely flat. We don't have all the different grooves in it. What happens is, but we do have about 85 billion of our brain cells. They're all there. We don't grow that many new ones. We will regenerate, but they're there. But the baby now just needs to be taught. Well, if we can do that at the young age and the body takes over, what happens to us as we begin to age? We're really dumbed down and numbed down over time to fit into systems that have been created because we signed a societal contract without even knowing that we would agree to what people told us. So let me ask you this, Paul. When you were a little boy, what was your dream? What did you want to be when you grew up?
God, I really can't remember. Isn't that a sad truth? I really can't remember. I remember being a teenager and I wanted to be a rock star, but before that, I don't remember.
And when you said you want to be a rock star, what did everyone say?
Actually, probably prior I was a teen. Probably when I was young boy, I'm sub 10 or whatever. I I wanted to be wealthy for whatever reason, and I do remember how people reacted to that. People thought I was crazy, and people also didn't like me saying it because I challenged. Because it was, I learned not to talk about it too much. But I remember, I suppose maybe I'm going to say I wanted to be successful. Yeah, I didn't want to have the limitations of no, you can't have this. No, I wanted to have a much broader horizon of what I could do, be, and have and create in my life. But I learned early on not to talk too much about it because you get a lot of negativity um, from society if you do.
And you said it best. You said because people would tell me I was crazy because it made them feel uncomfortable.
Yes, yeah.
And then the older we get, the more we get away from our childhood dreams. When we're born, everything's possible
Mm.
because we have this limitless imagination. And then we get pushed into these boxes to fit in. And I would say, you know what, 96% of people, I would say, follow the path that somebody else gave them. But when they were kids, they had their own path. And what we do, like I said, is we take our brain and the way the brain is aligned, free as a kid to play, imagine, dream,
Mm.
then becomes told this is the way to think. And we can change the brain. We can change the way we think. We can go from poor decisions to great character. We can have that if we realign the brain. So when we go back to George Best and his alcoholism, it was such a way of his thinking and the process. When I'm suffering from this, I drink this. When I'm feeling low esteem or I need to be boosted up, I go and get a couple of blondes from London that I saw him walking home with.
Yeah.
These are things. Instead of how do I create that internally to make me more empowered, that I don't need other people to make me feel great. But by being great, other people will admire me. And it's not just admire you. Oh, isn't it great you got money? No, I love your character. I love that you're willing to take the risk. I love the success you built. I love the failures that you went through because people grab more on failures than they do success because we all experience failures. Not everyone experiences success. So we relate into that. I'll tell you, I opened a sports performance gym in Los Angeles. Incredible place. Tottenham flew in. We had different places, and they were telling us it was like, Tottenham's training ground on steroids. Watching Tottenham these days doesn't sound like it's that big of a compliment, but that's a whole nother story. But I had the worst business partner. And here I am, an entrepreneur, finding an open warehouse with nothing in it and building the most incredible training center. And I learned very early on, unfortunately, he sat there to my face and went, Dan, you're too nice and you're too honest. And I was like, isn't that a compliment? My mum's going to love that.
Yeah.
Right? Because I took the compliment. And this is where the ego came in, where I go, it was my choice, if you looked at it that way, to blame that, or was my character wrong that I didn't listen to what was being said? My character at the time wanted the compliment to feel good. 3 years later, he hadn't put his money in, hadn't done what he said. I had to basically fold the business. And he sued me for mismanagement of business, fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary promise, theft, all these different things that you can go and find online. Well, once he did that, I had to fight back. It cost me over $300,000 to defend myself in the court because he had no proof. I worked literally 22 hours a day for 3 years because I'm trying to make this business work. I'd go to bed at midnight, wake up at 2, go back and fixing everything up. I had to fight back because who would ever want to work with me if I was guilty of all the things that he... So, and I'm going to go on to a story that I've never really told it before because it's very personal. It's actually pretty vulnerable. And I didn't have the money. He had drained me of every penny that I had. I had my nonprofit organization. He attached them. He'd take them over, everything. And he was the vice president of the Russian Lawyers Union. Very financially successful man who knew how to play the system. And he had sued multiple people and won. It took me 7 years to fight, but it was my name he attacked. It wasn't the business. I had done nothing that he had said. I had given everything. And it was devastating. Devastating that I lost everything. He had had all this success in football, in show business, all these different things. And I was broke. And you'll understand this, Paul, to a certain extent. I used to race bikes. That was my passion. And I woke up, I'd had another person come in that was going to rent my house for a couple of months to help pay everything going on. I traveled and he stayed up. I couldn't get him out of my house. So now I had nothing. I'm living in a truck. I decided I was going to commit suicide. It was over. And I got on this bike and I rode up one of the Santa Monica Mountains. I used to race up, fly up it, and I'm going up it 3 to 4 miles an hour. There's one place called The Wall, which goes up to about 19%.
I know what 19% feels like. Yeah.
I couldn't even get up it. I got off the bike. I walked to the edge and it was only halfway up, but there's a place you could jump. I threw my bike in the bushes and I went and stood on the edge and I'm going to jump. And a little voice on the side said, Dan, just do it. The pain was too much. We're talking around 2016. Another side said, Dan, get back on the bike and get to the top of the mountain. And I edged a little bit closer to the edge. And then it goes, Dan, just do it. You can't take this anymore. The other voice said, get back on your bike and get to the top of the mountain. It went on for a little while and I went back, grabbed my bike out of the bushes, got back on and wound up this mountain to the top. When I got to the top, I didn't go, yes, I made it. There was zero. I had zero energy, zero enthusiasm, but a voice turned on in my head and it said, if the pilot light is still on, the flame can be immense. If the pilot light is still on, the flame can be immense.
So you mean if there's a tiny part of inspiration, if this small part of that vision or dream still alive, it can spark into something. Yeah.
We're breathing. Everyone here that's listening to you and your podcasts and all the stuff that you guide with your mentorship and your example of success. If you're taking a breath and you want it, you can achieve incredible success because the pilot light is still on. I see people walking around that have settled with their life. They're still breathing, but there's no pilot light on because they're not willing to step out. But if it's there, I went down that mountain the slowest I'd ever gone down. I wasn't excited. I knew there was something more. And from that, I was able to create a company that made 8 figures. We did 13 million in sales in our first 16 months.
Wow.
Launch. which was an incredible experience. And that was a few years later. So as you were talking about earlier, it's not overnight.
No.
And everyone suddenly I'm on TV and doing all these different things. And it came to me from a dream. There was a purpose, a dream. I created what was in the dream. I made it into a product to help one celebrity who had incredible success. And then investors came to me and said, we need to launch this. And it was a fascinating journey because, again, I was still ignorant in the level of the business that I was now at. Because now you're dealing with a whole different group of people. And we can go into this a little bit more if you're interested in what happened with that business from a business point of view. So it's a product it was called 60 Up, and it was a balanced training system that reconnects the brain to the body. So falls are the number one reason leading to death for seniors, but also MS, Parkinson's, stroke survivors, ataxia, TBIs. Any time that you lose your mobility and balance, you will decline. And this goes back to what you were saying, Paul, about your health and working out. And it's so important. It's proven those people with good balance, and we're talking about freedom of movement without thought, live 8 years longer than those that don't, across the board. This is independent studies. And so I was helping a gentleman by the name of Bob Eubanks, who did the Newlywed Game. He was 79 falling, and the end wasn't looking too far away. So I started training him and went away from training the body, because babies don't learn to walk by going to the gym. It's the brain-body connection. So why, when people are losing their balance or mobility, why do we send them to the gym? It's not, our system hasn't changed. We need to strengthen the neurological pathways from the brain to the body. So went ahead, created this training system to train him on that I had to create because there was no guidance. It was never been done before in this way. And his success was so great. Other celebrities, Shirley MacLaine, Mark Dacascos, who played the lead opposite Keanu Reeves in John Wick 3, all these different things. They couldn't believe what had happened, and I'm training their people. And the investors came in and said, we want to take this. I was able to raise $2 million in 2 weeks.
Wow.
Which is pretty good.
It's
right? Yeah, we only needed to use 1.2. We didn't take all the investment in because obviously you don't want to give away all your percentages in the company. And we launched, had a great team to launch. We actually launched probably before we should have, but we corrected. And that's one of the things that entrepreneurs that don't succeed, they take too long to launch. They want it to be perfect. And it will never be perfect because everyone has a different opinion. But if you launch and then are open to receive feedback, you can correct. So we're doing great. And then there's a couple of things that I'll bring up, which are just little tip points in here. But I didn't understand the org chart. I was the creator, the inventor, the president, the CEO, the largest shareholder of the company. But I didn't have control of the company because the chairman does. And my CMO came to me and said, look, we need to let go of this lady who is working in there. She just doesn't work fast enough. She's not on a regular schedule. Great lady, super talented, but we were growing faster than the work was coming in. I said, well, go tell the chairman, because I'm not telling him. Why not? Well, it's a family member. I don't get involved in family. So I said, well, is it good for the company? He says it's imperative. I said, fine, I'll tell him. So I go in, let him know that we have to let his family member go. And again, she was brilliant. And he goes, Dan, I think you should step aside from the company. I'm like, what do you mean?
Were you a majority shareholder, though, did you say?
I was the largest shareholder, but in the org chart, the chairman can do what he's the ultimate say. And so, and I didn't have 51% of the company. I had 39% of the company. And so then it would go to a whole vote. And I said, look, if it's good for the company for me to step aside, I will, but I don't think it's the right thing to do. But if it's good for the company, I will, because I want us to be successful.
Of course.
Thinking that he had the same intention. I stepped aside. They brought in someone that wasn't right to run the company. And I saw the company going down. So I went to some CEO friends of mine. I said, I've got to go back in. I've got to go and I've got to save my baby. They said, Dan, you got to let it burn. I said, what do you mean you got to let it burn? Because you got to let it burn. Because if you go back in and it's burning and you can't turn it around, goes, you will be seen as the reason it burned.
It's on you.
It's all on me because I created a problem trying to save it. So I had to sit back for 6 months and watch everything go. We went to bankruptcy, 2 million in debt.
Yeah.
Now, credit to the chairman, he did put some more money in to try and save us. Not enough, but enough to keep us alive. So I came back and I went to Wharton Executive Business School. And I had never run a business before. I had to understand when I came back in with 2 million in debt, how was I going to pull us out of so I can save the company? The very first thing they teach you at Wharton Business School, the most important part of your business is the team. Everything is the team. They said there's never a case where you've had the wrong team and the company could be successful. It will fold. Well, I spent in the next 2 years removing about 1.8 million of debt. I didn't take a salary for 3 years, not one penny in salary. I'd even sell stuff for my house just to, continue to have stuff because it meant enough to me. And I learned so much during that time, but we couldn't save the company, but I didn't have to bankrupt it. I spoke with the investors, great people. They said, look, Dan, if you can save, because I said, we need $100,000 put into the company for us to be able to save it. They said, we're not willing to put more money in. I said, well, I'm going to do this. I have these opportunities I've created. I've got this. If you walk away, I will close the company. I will rebrand it, but that's your decision. They said, we're happy to walk away. So I closed the company, rebranded it, was able to bring in the inventory that we still had left over, and we're about to relaunch as Total Balance Company as a rebrand. And we've already got so much going on. We've got patents, we've got all the different stuff. Wow. So again, another example, Paul, of every action is a potential, but you've got to be smart enough to realize it's not going to work and walk away. At the same time, you never walk away with and have to start again because you've got all that knowledge, provided you're smart enough to use it. But I'm so excited about, I believe we're going to do even better than we did before, because the longevity and perseverance and relationships that are built in the toughest of times will also help from the experience learned. And what I learned at Wharton Business School, cash flow is critical. If you don't have cash flow, you're going to be in trouble. But even more than that, know your numbers. I didn't know my numbers well enough. I thought we're making money. We weren't making enough. So you've got to know what's the cost, what's your overhead, what is the burn rate, what is your fixed costs, and then what am I generating in revenue? And that would determine what your price point has to be to make sure you can stay in the game long enough to become something that will really impact people. So it's been a fascinating story and life where I look at everybody. Age is not the reason for failure. We don't stop playing because we age. We age because we stop playing. In business, we don't become unable to be successful because of our age. We become aging, which makes us think that we could have missed the opportunity. We haven't. There's so much more. If you look at where you are today, Paul, and I'm sure there was a time, it used to be a badge of honor. How are you? Oh, I'm so busy. I got so much going on. It was a badge of honor. It's not. The badge of honor is, I've got spare time. Business is going great. I've got the money to go and do things. I can look after my friends, my family. I can live the dreams that I couldn't afford. That's the badge of honor. Build the team, know your business inside out, but never give up on the dreams that keep you alive and make you excited to wake up tomorrow.
As I'm listening to it, what I'm hearing is that out of the huge business challenge and going to Wharton Business School, you've learned some of the really key lessons of business. I never went to Wharton Business School. I never went to college. So I learned along the road, learned from some people. But I think when you understand that within your business, team is absolutely everything. And I interviewed a guy called Cameron Harold. I think his episode went out a couple of days ago. and very experienced business, built a huge business. And I asked him what he thought about culture in a business, which is how your team work together. Um, he confirmed to me what I certainly believe. He said to me, "Culture, everything." And so, if you don't have the right team, you just won't build. You won't build a business. I describe running a business to people as sitting in the cockpit of an airplane, and there are 4 or 5 lights you have to watch. You've mentioned them: cash flow, profits, other things. And when you're watching those, then you're driving the plane. You don't need to be down serving drinks. That's what the air hostess is for. But you need to understand. You need to understand what they are. Um, you've spoken so much about character. You've spoken so much about rewiring your brain. And one of the questions that came to mind is back to our experience of being together in Phoenix. And I think there were about 30 people in the room. And what was really interesting was on the first day, we were all asked to introduce ourselves. And normally you're in a room of 30 people and people are asked to introduce themselves and they kind of sit down, they quietly whisper and that. Not in that room. In that room, you asked them, everyone stood up and it's like they were on stage and they're on fire. So there really was a tribe of people who very much of that get up and go attitude. And I loved being there, but that's unusual. Now, when we talk about character, what I'm wondering is when you see those 30 people in that room who engage and have that view on life, um, is that how much of that do you think is genetic? How much of that do you think is environment? How much of that is learned? Because it's not normal. I imagine, I don't know how you felt in the room, but I imagine I certainly felt you're in your tribe when you're standing in that room. But it's not normal. If someone else has stuck their head in the room going, these people are crazy. So how much of that do you think, to what degree do we develop that character? To what degree are the people in that room just of that nature from the time they were born?
Yeah, there's so much research that goes into I'm trying to think, the word just evaded me, but birth order, right? If we went through the room and said how many were the firstborn, how many were the only child, how many were the fifth born, there's so much science behind the leaders and the responsibility in the firstborn or the first son born because of the responsibilities. And that might have been an interesting thing to look at,
Yeah.
which now that you bring it up, I wish I had have asked. Before I go into that, Paul, are you the firstborn in your family? Do you have siblings, brothers, sisters?
I have an older sister, but I'm the first boy born. And many, many years ago, a psychiatrist said to me that, whatever psychology said to me, because you're male, you considered yourself the firstborn. As a child, I don't know how true that is, but he said you considered yourself the firstborn. So I have an older sister and a younger brother. I would say if you want to class people in that A-type Gopher personality, I certainly have that to a much. My brother and sister, lovely people, very intelligent, very capable. But I don't know if they have that fire in their belly that I have. But we were brought up in the same environment.
And that's the whole thing. Is I went and saw a great movie called Sing Street. It was actually set in Ireland.
Yes, I know it.
Um, yeah, I love the movie. And there's a great. So I took my brother to see it, who's younger than me. I was the second oldest, older sister, but first boy. And growing up in the communities where the boy did the chores, the boy was in charge of this. I had to be the protector. And we had those kind of roles in there. So I don't know how that's changed in modern society. Certainly the new generation coming in. But my brother afterwards came out. He goes, Dan, I kind of get it. I said, what do you mean? He goes, you carved the path and I didn't have to suffer along the way. In other words, if I got into altercations with my dad, there was physical stuff that would go on as we were growing up. My dad was a fighter, all these different things. My brother just drifted through life. He's resilient, but he doesn't have the same drive. So I think that's part of it. I also think, Paul, there's wake up calls that happen in life that we have no idea. I call it destiny.
Mm.
So, for example, a little girl's walking down Santa Monica with her mum. A homeless guy jumps out, scares the crud out of her. She gets really nervous and shakes up, and the homeless guy walks off, not meaning to do anything. It was just that experience. And then the mother says, look, that's what happens if you don't work hard. You can end up being homeless, and then you don't have that. And the girl that day makes the decision, I'm going to work hard in school. Well, she ends up becoming the one that creates the cure for AIDS. I'm just saying it as an
Yeah.
example. Nobody will know that it was that homeless man that generated that moment, that created the character. It could be that so many stories I've heard with I speak in the biohacking world, I speak in the health world, I speak in, many different conventions. What I found is that doctors became doctors because of the suffering of somebody else in their family, or an inventor that has a successful product created something because there was a need to solve. And so I think that, again, it goes back to how do we relate to it. Some people will sit back,
I was going to
right?
say that. It's also perspective. And as you're saying that, I remember being a young kid. So, Ireland now is a very prosperous country. But if you go to, I was born in 1965. So if you look at, so being living in Ireland in the 70s and 80s, it was, I'm going to say, a poor country, but there wasn't much prosperity in it. I remember turning up in my 20s to a conference, and a business conference, and there being a Mercedes in the driveway, and it was like, what? Yeah, they're everywhere now, but it was absolutely amazing to see it. And I knew I didn't want that, but I have an image, I can see it now, of being a child and seeing it, what I thought was an old man. Maybe he was my age, but what I thought was, it looked like an old man pushing along with a bag, and he's going along on a bicycle. And I'm looking at this old man, and I'm thinking, I'm a kid. He's had decades in life. Surely you can use those decades in life to create prosperity and abundance in your life. Why would you not? Why would you not do that? So I was always drawn to create that prosperity and abundance in my life. But I can still see that an image. But I suppose when I saw that image of the old man who could only afford to ride a bicycle, I suppose at that point in time there were two options for me. One for me to go, he's had 70 years to grow wealth. How come he hasn't done it? So from the time I'm very young, I'm going, how do I create financial freedom? How do I create prosperity? And my whole life becomes about how do I create that? I could have made a different decision. I could have gone, doesn't matter. You can work hard all your life, you still end up poor. And my life, had that been the perspective, then my life would have ended up entirely differently, I think. So through your story, through a lot of hardship and success, it's back to, you said that is that flame burning. There always is that moment where you can choose, and maybe you can't choose, but maybe your character determines that you go in a certain way. Because I've no doubt. I remember, I've told the story before. I remember having lunch with a personal friend many years ago, and we're talking about investing. I'm keen on investing in the stock market. So I come on to the topic if you can get me onto it. But I'm also careful who I'm talking to, because if the person I'm talking to doesn't have a lot of resources, I'm careful. I'm speaking to a friend, and we spoke back to a time, I think could have been around 2008 or something, of the crash, of they lost money in a pension. And I remember losing money at the time as well. So at that time, they froze. They made a decision that said, investing is bad. I've lost money, and therefore I won't ever do it again. And so they've done okay in their life, but they don't have the financial freedom I have in my life. I also lost money on several occasions, but on the occasions I lost money, I said, "Damn, I'm doing something wrong. I know I'm doing something wrong because there's all these wealthy people." So it's not that you can't do it. It's the question is, what are they doing? And I asked the question, what are they doing? How can I learn? I continued to ask that question and continue to make mistakes, and would slowly turn the dial till I got to a point going, now I know what to do. So again, character, perspective, choice, I don't know what you'd call it, but the decisive moments that carve our life, I think.
Yeah, and again, when you look back at it yourself as a young boy, having that was part of your character, but you could have been numbed down.
Yeah.
You could have been told, but there was something when people said, "Don't talk like that." You said, "Okay, then I'll just be quiet, but I'm not changing the way that I think."
Yeah, so that's what I did. I did decide not to express it, which is something I've only learned recently about myself. I learned to be quiet about it, but I just went inside and said, but I can become so strong inside. I can become so resilient inside that really doesn't matter what other people think about it. They can live life the way they want, but it doesn't make difference. Because I mean, all those situations you described, all those challenges, it was your inner resilience that got you to turn the table. I'm conscious that we're coming to the end, and I'm conscious of your time. Can you talk to me about the 7 pillars of health? Because I know that's key to what you teach, and I'm conscious we don't have time to go into all that. But for our audience,
Mm.
really, what were the 7 pillars of health you came up with and you wrote about in the book, and that you feel are probably key for all of us to understand?
Yeah, so it goes back to the fact we're born superhuman,
Mm.
and over time we're numbed down. So I looked at the seven, and I'm saying, okay, what's really important for us to be able to thrive every day when we wake up? What are the things that hold us back? Because we know stress holds us back. We know it can actually kill us.
Mm.
We know that disease comes from inflammation. And when you have that, your brain, for me, we have two life forces. We have our heart, which is really our life force. And then we have our brain, that's our power force. Our brain can't think without the mindset that we have. The brain will only keep us alive, but it won't. The brain doesn't want us to work hard. The mind makes us work hard or makes us lazy. So when I looked at it, I said, okay, what are the things that allows us from brain to body and outside of that to be our highest level of excellence? And there's 3 laws of nature, and I'll keep this short because I know time's pushing. But whatever we chase runs away, whatever we fight grows stronger, and whatever we resist persists. Now, the last one really counts. In business, the other 2 really count. But in the last one, whatever we resist persists. So if we're tired, if we're not functioning, if we feel a little bit dazed, if we're not excited, it's because we're resisting doing what we need to do. So pillar number 1 is oxygen. I looked at it and said, if we took this away, how quickly would we die? So you take oxygen away, you're going to be gone within 5 to 15 minutes. You're either dead or brain dead.
Mm.
And so what can we do to enhance the oxygen that we're getting into our body? I'm not talking about going to get an oxygen machine, because you can't actually do that. You need to have carbon dioxide, and there's many other parts to it. So number 1's oxygen. Number 2, which I would say is the biggest problem, I mean, if I go back to oxygen, it can be our environment. We live in a place where there's contaminated air. We have mold in the house. All that stuff affects the brain and the body's ability to work. Number 2 is hydration. Hydration. And part of that is hydrogen water that I'm a huge fan of. But again, doing it right, because there's a lot of fake out there. But hydration is critical. We've shown with professional athletes at football, 3% dehydration can lead to 20% underperformance. But the brain consumes about 25% of all red blood cells that come in. So if we can't get our brain to go in, if our blood is too thick because we're dehydrated and it's not now being absorbed into the brain, it's critical. And I'd love to go into this deeper, but I won't. But we can, talk about it another time. Number 3 is sleep. It's critical. If you look in the military, if you look at what happens to people when they don't sleep, they begin to shut down. Sleep deprivation would kill you faster than not eating. And the brain then starts going into the dementia, the Alzheimer's over time. The longer you do it, you're not getting better. Number 4 is nutrition. What we eat directly affects our brain, it affects our heart, it affects our body, our energy is very much in there. Number 5 comes exercise. If you're not exercising, if you're exercising and not doing the others, you're going to drain yourself.
Yeah.
If you're doing the others but you don't exercise, we're not stressing our body or our mind. And it's so essential to stress, but positive stress. So you go out, you go on a run, you feel the muscles working, you're breathing a little hard. The body will adapt. The body is a miracle. We just need to unleash the miracle within. So that's number 5 is exercise. Number 6 is mindset. If we don't have the right mindset, you're going nowhere. How can we create that mindset that really makes you bulletproof? That makes you, it doesn't mean to say you don't suffer. It doesn't mean to say you don't go through challenges. That's the stress that you need to grow. But if you have the right mindset, even in the worst times, then maybe you think of giving up, but you can figure out the solution before you make that drastic error. You can become great. And the last one, the 7th pillar, is challenges. If you stop challenging yourself, then you will decline. And all of them put together, you work on all of them, they become part of your daily habit. And it's incredible, Paul, the turnaround, the people that I've mentored, I've trained 70,000 people. And it's incredible to see how they change. And sometimes it's not all 7, it may be 1 or 2, but it makes a massive impact. We just need to identify what it is. And if anybody's interested, am I allowed to say that?
Of course, absolutely.
I don't want to jump in there. But if anybody wants to go to bornsuperhuman.com, you'll begin to see, the program that I have. I bring in fantastic experts on those 7 pillars, excuse me, or incredible stories, because I have a podcast that I love called Inspiring People by Inspiring People. People that you've never heard of that have done incredible things, that have overcome incredible odds. Maybe just a moment, why aren't we tapping into that all the time? Why do we wait for the challenge before we find out how amazing we are? Lead from the front, be passionate, and then if you want to incorporate brain neuroplasticity that keeps you learning, totalbalancecompany.com, which is my training system for physical and brain training, is an incredible gift to yourself, not me. It's an incredible gift to continue to function at your highest levels.
Dan, it's been an amazing conversation. I've learned so much. I'm a bit blown away. I'm gonna have to listen to it again and take notes. It's been an amazing conversation. So thank you very, very much. And I really would encourage people to explore your website and find your podcast and find out what you have going on, because there's so much to teach, and we've all so much to learn. So Dan, thank you. It's been an absolute joy and an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much. It's been my honor to be here and connecting with people. I'd like to leave them with one thing. Stay passionate about curiosity. Continue to learn. Be excited. Just stay curious.
Stay passionate. If you can do that, you're well on the road.
Thanks so much.